Ladies and gentlemen, gather round, hunters, streamers, and future legends. Tonight, we log into the server of history to recount the complete life story of a man who didn't just play the game, he rewrote its source code. This is the saga of the one they call, the Monarch of Iron Body. Picture it, not a blessed scion of some great clan, not a genius who awakened his power at age 5. No, our hero was a mere F-rank hunter, the lowest of the low. While others spawned with legendary grade gear, he started with nothing but his 2 fists and a resolve that refused to shatter. He was the underdog you always root for in the first episode, the one everyone else looks down on and calls trash. His training wasn't a montage with epic music, it was pure, grueling, system-defying madness. While others slept, he was in the dungeon's lowest levels, letting D-rank monsters wail on him. His bones didn't just break, they powdered. His muscles didn't just tear, they unraveled. But with every healing potion, every agonizing recovery, his body adapted. It was like he was constantly upgrading his own character model, patch by painful patch. He wasn't just grinding for levels, he was forging his very being in the fires of adversity. Ladies and gentlemen, if we are to understand the legend of the Monarch of Iron Body, we must first discard any notion that his greatest strength was his physical form. The iron skin, the bones that shattered only to reform stronger, the fists that could punch through a dungeon wall, these were merely the symptoms, the external manifestations of his true power. The core, the very engine of his being, was something far less tangible and infinitely more powerful, an unbreakable spirit. Think of the most cliché, bottom-tier start imaginable in the great virtual world of life. We're not talking about a B-rank hunter with a decent starting package. We're talking F-rank, the absolute bottom of the barrel. The class everyone pities, the stat sheet that makes guild recruiters laugh and close the chat window. In a world of flashy mages and nimble assassins, he was the guy with the basic reinforcement skill, a skill so common, so utterly mundane, it was considered a placeholder until you unlocked something real. This was our protagonist. He was the NPC in his own story, a background character in the epic raids of others. The first major dungeon run of his life wasn't a glorious debut, it was a humiliation. Assigned to a low-level goblin cave, his party of fellow low-ranked saw him as the pack mule, the one who would carry the loot while they dealt the damage. But when a surprise ambush from a hobgoblin boss sent their tank flying, panic erupted. The healer froze, the DPS scattered, and in that moment of chaos, with the party's wipe imminent, he did the only thing his lowly stats allowed, he stood in front of the boss's club. He didn't parry it, he didn't block it with a fancy skill. He took it. The impact shattered his collarbone and sent him flying into a wall, his health bar plummeting into the red. But in that moment of excruciating pain, as his vision blurred, a single, defiant thought cut through the agony, not like this. That wasn't a calculated decision. It was the first, raw spark of his spirit igniting. He got up, he couldn't fight, but he could be a distraction. He stumbled, he taunted, he took another hit, this time, bracing for it. The party recovered, defeated the boss, and collected the rewards. They didn't thank him, they called him a reckless noob, and a damage sponge. But as they ported back to town, he remained, looking at his broken body not with despair, but with a strange, burgeoning realization. While his body had broken, his will to stand up had not. That was the anvil upon which his legend would be forged. This pattern became his grueling, self-imposed training regimen. While other hunters grinded for better loot or hunted for rare skill books, he embarked on a path that seemed like madness. He would venture into dungeons alone, not to clear them, but to survive them. He would deliberately aggro monsters and let them wail on him. He studied the physics of pain, the way impact traveled through his flesh, how his bones vibrated just before they cracked. Each return to the city was a spectacle of pity and ridicule. "There goes the masochist," they'd whisper. "The guy who's too stupid to even die correctly." But they missed the entire point. With every healing potion chugged, every night spent in the recovery pods, his body was subtly learning, adapting. His basic reinforcement skill, a skill everyone else abandoned at level 5, was, for him, the only skill he had. So he leveled it, he pushed it to level 10, then 20, then 50. He was treating his own existence like a piece of crude iron, and every monster's blow was the hammer of a master blacksmith, beating out the impurities. The pain was the fire. The will to continue was the bellows. He wasn't just increasing a number on a stat sheet, he was fundamentally rewriting his own source code through sheer, brutal repetition. The true test of an unbreakable spirit, however, is never the physical pain, it's the psychological warfare. The doubters became his constant companions. Guilds blacklisted him for his bizarre and inefficient methods. Former friends, who had started with him and now soared through the ranks with flashy AoE attacks, would message him. "Give it up, man," they'd say. "Reroll a new character. Your build is trash." They offered him easy shortcuts, rare items that would give him a temporary power boost, but would ultimately cap his potential. And here, his spirit shone brightest. He refused. He understood a fundamental truth that the meta-slaves and min-maxers had forgotten: a power borrowed is a power that can be taken away. A power forged in your own soul, tempered by your own suffering, is yours forever. This culminated in the infamous Tower of Trials arc. To prove his worth, he entered a solo instance dungeon designed to break challengers not just physically, but mentally. The final chamber held no monster. Instead, it was a mirror that reflected his deepest insecurities. It showed him a vision of himself if he had taken the easy path, a well-geared, comfortably strong A-rank hunter, respected, but ultimately just another face in the crowd. Then it showed him his current path, a future of endless, grueling pain, with no guarantee of success. The ultimate, "Are you sure?" prompt before a point of no return. A weaker spirit would have wavered. But the monarch of Iron Body simply looked at the mirror, at the specter of his own doubt, and smiled. He didn't need to speak. His answer was in the countless scars that already mapped his body, in the countless times he had chosen the harder path. He walked through the mirror, shattering the illusion. The system notification that flashed before him wasn't for a new skill or a stat boost. It was a single, legendary title: Unbreakable will unlocked. This was the core of everything. His iron body was simply the physical manifestation of this title. When he later stood against the Frostfire Dragon's breath, it wasn't his skin that held firm, it was his spirit. When he faced down the final boss of the 100th floor, a being that could manipulate reality itself, the boss's most powerful attack wasn't a physical one, it was a mental assault that showed him an eternity of failure and solitude. And the monarch simply stood there, his spirit an immovable object, because you cannot break something that has already been broken and reforged 1,000 times. The unbreakable spirit wasn't his weapon, it was his very existence. And that is why he wasn't just a top-tier hunter. He was a monarch. To believe the monarch's power was a simple gift of fate is to misunderstand the very essence of his legend. He was not struck by a lightning bolt of divine power. He did not stumble upon a hidden system cheat. No, his strength was not found, it was forged. And the crucible for this unimaginable power was a life of relentless, brutal adversity. Imagine, if you will, the process of creating a legendary, one-of-a-kind sword. A master blacksmith doesn't start with a pristine, perfect bar of steel. He starts with raw, crude iron, riddled with impurities. This was our hero, the crude ore, dismissed by everyone as worthless, as F-rank scrap. The world saw the imperfections, he saw potential. But potential is nothing without the fire and the hammer. And so, he willingly walked into the inferno. His training was a symphony of controlled catastrophe. While other hunters practiced their combos on training dummies, he ventured into the scorching canyons to let the Ember Hounds use him as their personal chew toy. Their fiery fangs weren't just causing damage, they were burning away the weakness in his flesh, tempering his skin into something more. When others were in the guild halls sharing loot, he was at the bottom of the frozen tundra waterfalls, standing under the crushing weight of 1,000,000 tons of ice-cold water, not to build muscle, but to teach his bones how to bear the impossible. Each fracture was a lesson. Every torn ligament was a lecture in anatomy and resilience. This was not a montage of quick cuts and uplifting music. This was a slow, painful, and often lonely documentary of suffering. There were no spectators cheering him on. There were only the silent, judging walls of the dungeons and the echoing cracks of his own skeleton. The healing pods became his second home, the glowing green liquid his most frequent companion. He would emerge from them, body whole but memory scarred, only to turn around and walk right back into the grinder. He was both the blacksmith and the heated metal, consciously shaping himself through agony. The system itself seemed to rebel against his unorthodox methods. Status screens would flash warnings of critical damage sustained and inefficient express gain. It was as if the game itself was telling him to stop, to play the way it was designed. But he ignored the alerts. He wasn't playing the game's rules anymore, he was writing his own. Each inefficient hours spent simply surviving was depositing a currency no one else could see into a stat called fortitude. The system measured his health in hit points, but it had no gauge for the density of his spirit. His ultimate technique, the indomitable Iron Fortress, was not a skill he unlocked in a skill tree. It was the final, perfect form of the metal he had been hammering for years. It was the culmination of every ember hound's bite, every waterfall's crush, every shattered bone and every silent, solitary night of recovery. The adversity was not an obstacle on his path, it was the path. The Monarch of Iron Body understood a fundamental truth that separates the merely strong from the truly legendary. A diamond is just a piece of coal that handled pressure exceptionally well. He didn't avoid the pressure, he invited it in, and used it to become the hardest thing in the entire world. The moment of his ascension was not when he withstood the Frostfire Dragon's breath. That was merely the announcement. His true coronation came in the silent, aching hours that followed. This is the pivotal arc in the Monarch's story that so many fail to understand, the journey from seeking personal power to bearing the unbearable weight of a crown. For the crown of a true monarch is not forged from gold, but from duty, and it is the heaviest thing a person can ever wear. In the beginning, his quest was utterly personal. It was about survival, about proving the world wrong, about scrubbing off the stain of being F-rank trash. His iron body was his answer to every insult, his defiance given physical form. He was the lone wolf, the unbreakable solo player. But as his legend grew, so did the eyes upon him. He began to notice the hopeful gazes of the weak, the desperate pleas from low-tier hunting parties about to be wiped out in a dungeon they'd overestimated. He saw himself in them. And for the first time, his unbreakable body felt a new sensation, the weight of an expectation. The turning point was the cataclysm at Silverbridge Gate. It wasn't a single mighty boss, but a relentless, endless wave of monsters pouring from a ruptured dungeon core. The city's elite S-rank hunters formed their flashy front line, their spells lighting up the sky like a festival. But they were overwhelmed, their formations broken. The breach was imminent, and in that chaos, he didn't see glory. He saw a tidal wave of death about to crash over the city's civilian sector, the non-combatants, the shopkeepers, the families. There was no time for a grand strategy. There was only a choke point and a choice. He moved, not with the graceful flash of an assassin, but with the grim, unstoppable finality of a falling fortress wall. He planted himself in the breach. He didn't throw a single punch. He simply stood. He became a dam against the horde. Claws shattered against his skin. Acidic spit sizzled and evaporated. The monsters piled against him, a living, seething mountain of rage, and he did not yield an inch. For 12 hours, he held the line, his feet rooted to the pavement, his body the only thing between the city and annihilation. When the reinforcements finally cleared the horde, they found him still standing, encased in a shell of monster corpses, his body steaming, his knuckles white. The citizens he saved rushed forward, not with cheers, but with a quiet, awed reverence. They didn't call him Hunter. They called him Shield. And in that moment, he understood. His power was no longer his own. It was a public utility. It was the wall that let others sleep soundly at night. This is the solitude of the crown. He could no longer be the reckless solo artist. Every move he made now had consequences for thousands. His iron body became a symbol, and symbols cannot afford to fall. He bore the weight of their hope, their faith, their very lives. His title, Monarch, was not a declaration of rulership, but an acknowledgement of this supreme responsibility. He had not conquered a throne, he had shouldered a tombstone, and on it was carved the names of everyone he was now sworn to protect. His strength was no longer for breaking things, it was for holding everything together. What makes the Monarch's story echo so deeply in our souls, what makes us lean forward in our seats and clutch our hearts, is not that he was a god walking among mortals. It is the breathtakingly opposite truth. His ascent was so profoundly, painfully relatable. He is the ultimate underdog, and we see our own struggles reflected in his every scar. He is the living proof that the most epic legends are not born on mountaintops, but forged in the mud of the very bottom. Let's be brutally honest. Most of us are not the S-rank prodigy who awakens a unique SSS tier skill on their first day. We are not the charismatic guild leader with a legendary bloodline. In the massive, open-world MMORPG of life, most of us are the F-rank hunters. We are the ones grinding the boring, repetitive daily quests. We are the ones with the basic reinforcement skill in a world that seems to reward only the flashy, the lucky, and the preordained. We know the sting of being overlooked, the frustration of hitting a ceiling that feels immovable, the quiet despair of comparing our slow progress to someone else's highlight reel. The Monarch was us. His starting point was not zero, it was negative. He wasn't just weak, he was a joke. And that is why his journey is a blueprint for our own. He didn't have a secret mentor or a hidden inheritance. His cheat was a disgusting, almost inhuman work ethic. He understood a fundamental truth that the system tries to hide, that consistency is the most powerful skill of all. While others chased the meta, he was in the background, doing his daily reps. One more punch, one more hit, one more level in a skill everyone else had forgotten. His progress wasn't a soaring line on a graph, it was a slow, arduous crawl, punctuated by constant, soul-crushing setbacks. This is what makes his triumphs feel so earned. When he finally stood and took that first hit without flinching, we felt that. It wasn't just a stat increase, it was a personal victory for every person who has ever been knocked down and chosen to get back up. When he first parried a blow that would have killed him a week before, we cheered not for a fictional character, but for the idea that growth is possible. His level ups were our level ups. His frustrations were our frustrations. He is the embodiment of the hope that we, too, can redefine our own rank. His story tells us that you don't need to be the chosen one to become a monarch of your own destiny. You just need the courage to embrace the grind, to find glory in the mundane, and to believe that the countless small, unseen efforts are, in fact, compounding into something legendary. He didn't wait for a quest to give him purpose, he found purpose in the quest to become stronger than he was yesterday. And in that, he gives us all the most powerful weapon imaginable, the belief that our own underdog story is still being written, and that the most satisfying victories are the ones we have to earn for ourselves.